I should have seen it coming when Jessica started laughing at my jokes differently. Not the warm, genuine laugh I fell in love with 12 years ago, but this new sound, sharp, calculated, like she was filing away ammunition for later use. My name is Kai Dornell, and I'm a project manager for Henderson Construction. Nothing fancy, nothing glamorous, just a guy who makes sure buildings get built on time and under budget. I thought that was enough. I was wrong. "Honey, don't bother dressing up tonight," Jessica said, not looking up from her phone as she applied lipstick in our bedroom mirror. "My sister wouldn't notice a guy like you anyway." There it was again, that casual cruelty wrapped in fake concern. I adjusted my tie, the good one, navy blue with thin silver stripes that she bought me for our anniversary 3 years back when she still pretended to care. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, though I already knew I'd regret it. She turned, giving me that practiced smile she reserved for disappointing news. "Oh, you know what I mean. Ayla's dating that lawyer now. Corporate types. You wouldn't have much in common." "Right. Because managing million-dollar construction projects apparently made me some kind of caveman." I bit back my first 3 responses, all of which would have started a fight we didn't have time for. Her parents expected us at 6, and being late would just give her mother more reasons to purse her lips at me. "I'll try to contain my blue-collar ignorance," I said instead. Jessica's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Don't be so sensitive. It's not attractive." 20 minutes later, we pulled into the Hartwell family driveway in Jessica's pristine white Honda. Everything about the Hartwell house screamed suburban perfection. Manicured lawn, matching shutters, those little solar lights lining the walkway like a runway to judgment. I grabbed the bottle of bourbon from the back seat, a 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle that had cost me more than I wanted to admit. "Where did you get that?" Jessica's eyes narrowed as she spotted the bottle. "Your father mentioned it was his favorite. Figured it was worth the investment." "Investment in what, exactly?" I didn't answer, just walked toward the front door. Sometimes silence said more than any comeback I could manage. Margaret Hartwell answered the door with her usual performance of enthusiasm. "Kai, Jessica, come in, come in. Robert's already started on the appetizers, and you know how he gets when the cheese gets warm." The house smelled like vanilla candles and disappointment. Robert Hartwell stood in his kitchen, wearing an apron that read "Grill Master" over his polo shirt, arranging crackers with the precision of a surgeon. The man had retired from banking 5 years ago and treated every social gathering like a board meeting. "Evening, Robert," I said, extending the bourbon. "Thought you might appreciate this." His eyebrows shot up as he read the label. For a moment, his carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something that might have been genuine surprise. "Pappy Van Winkle. This is quite expensive, Kai." "Good bourbon for good company," I replied. Jessica shot me a look that could have stripped paint. She hadn't expected this move, and I could practically see her recalculating whatever game she'd been planning. "Well," Margaret chimed in, "isn't that thoughtful? Ayla should be here any minute. She's bringing someone special." "The lawyer," Jessica added quickly. "I told you about him, remember? Very successful, very refined." Before I could respond, the doorbell chimed. Margaret practically sprinted to answer it, and I heard Ayla's voice in the foyer. Warm, genuine, nothing like her sister's practiced tones. Ayla Hartwell had always been the quieter sister, the one who listened more than she spoke. Where Jessica was all sharp angles and calculated charm, Ayla had this softness about her that seemed genuine. She worked as a librarian downtown, which Jessica never failed to mention, with barely concealed condescension. "Kai!" Ayla's smile was real as she entered the living room. "It's so good to see you. You look—" She paused, taking in my appearance with what seemed like genuine surprise. "You look really good. That suit is fantastic." "Thank you," I said, ignoring Jessica's sharp intake of breath. "You look lovely as always." "Where's your friend?" Margaret asked, looking past Ayla toward the door. Ayla's expression shifted slightly. "Oh, Marcus couldn't make it. Work emergency. You know how it is?" "Such a shame," Robert said, though he looked more relieved than disappointed. "Well, more room for the rest of us. Kai brought some excellent bourbon." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. We settled into the dining room, where Margaret had set out her good china and enough silverware to perform surgery. The conversation flowed in its usual patterns: Robert's golf game, Margaret's book club, Jessica's job at the marketing firm. I played my part, nodding at appropriate intervals, asking polite questions, being the dutiful son-in-law. Then Jessica dropped her bomb. "Actually," she said, setting down her wineglass with theatrical precision, I have some news to share with everyone. The table went quiet. Margaret's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Robert's hand tightened on his bourbon glass. Ayla looked between her sister and me with growing concern. I've filed for a temporary separation, Jessica announced. I think Kai and I need some time apart to figure things out. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Margaret made a small choking sound. Robert's face went through several color changes. Ayla's eyes widened, and she looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Jessica, I said carefully, this is the first I'm hearing about any separation. Her smile was razor sharp. Well, I wanted to discuss it with my family first. Get their input. Their input on my marriage? Our marriage, Kai. And yes, I value their opinions. I felt something shift inside me, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned, orchestrated, designed for maximum humiliation. She'd brought me here, to her parents' house, to ambush me in front of her family. She wanted witnesses to my downfall. I see, I said, taking a slow sip of my water. And what exactly are these issues you want to figure out? Jessica's confidence flickered for just a moment. She'd expected anger, maybe pleading. She hadn't expected calm curiosity. Well, there are trust issues. Financial concerns? I think you've been hiding things from me. Hiding things? Money, for one. I know you've been moving funds around without telling me. Robert leaned forward, his banker instincts kicking in. What kind of funds? Our savings account, Jessica said. Kai's been making unauthorized withdrawals, large ones. I nodded slowly, pulling out my phone. That's interesting, because I have all our banking records right here. Would you like me to show everyone exactly where every penny has gone? Jessica's face went pale. That's not necessary. No, I think it is. I turned the phone screen toward Robert. Here's last month's statement. That $1,000 withdrawal, Jessica's spa weekend with her friends, the $1,500 the week before, her shopping trip to Chicago, and this morning's $500 withdrawal, that would be the cash she took to pay for whatever she's been planning. Robert's expression hardened as he studied the screen. Margaret looked like she'd swallowed something unpleasant. Ayla was staring at her sister with growing disbelief. You went through my purse, Jessica accused. I went through our joint account records. Everything's documented. Timestamps, locations, even the ATM camera footage if anyone's interested. The room erupted. Margaret started asking rapid-fire questions. Robert demanded to see more records. Jessica tried to backtrack, claiming she'd been confused, that she'd meant something else entirely. Through it all, Ayla sat quietly, watching me with a strange expression. When the chaos reached its peak, she leaned over and whispered, She's been planning this for months. You have no idea what else she's done. That's when I realized the betrayal went deeper than a public ambush. Jessica hadn't just decided to humiliate me tonight. She'd been building toward this moment, laying groundwork, setting traps. The question was, what other surprises did she have waiting? I looked around the table at the wreckage of what had been a pleasant family dinner. Jessica sat rigid in her chair, her carefully planned ambush backfiring spectacularly. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Robert poured himself another bourbon, his face grim, and Ayla watched it all with those quiet, observant eyes, like she was seeing her sister clearly for the first time. The next morning, I woke up in the guest bedroom of our house. Jessica had claimed the master suite naturally, along with most of the moral high ground in her mind. I could hear her on the phone downstairs, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted sympathy, probably calling her friend Sierra, who had a talent for turning other people's drama into her own entertainment. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone. 3 missed calls from Ray Martinez, who tended bar at Murphy's downtown and had his finger on the pulse of every piece of gossip in a 50-mile radius. If Jessica was spreading her version of events, Ray would know about it. Kai, buddy. Ray's voice was grim when I called him back. We need to talk. Can you meet me at the bar before I open? Say, 10 o'clock? Murphy's looked different in the morning light. Smaller, sadder, like a theater with all the magic stripped away. Ray was restocking bottles behind the bar, his movements sharp and efficient. He'd been a bartender for 15 years and had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people's intentions. Coffee? He offered, gesturing toward a pot that had seen better decades. Please, and whatever unwelcome news you're eager to share. Ray poured 2 cups and slid one across the scarred wooden bar. Your wife's been busy. Sierra and Melanie were in here last night, talking loud enough for half the bar to hear. Apparently you're some kind of financial predator who's been stealing from joint accounts and hiding assets. That's creative. Gets better. According to them, you've been emotionally abusive for years, and Jessica's finally found the courage to leave. They've got a whole narrative worked out. I sipped the coffee, which tasted like it had been filtered through old socks. What else? There's more? Ray's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Brother, you look way too calm for a man whose wife is burning down his reputation. Maybe I've got a fire extinguisher. Ray studied my face with the intensity of a poker player reading tells. You know something. What is it? I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots I'd taken the night before. Not just bank records, but text messages, emails, even a few photos Jessica probably thought she'd deleted. The modern world made it remarkably easy to document someone's lies when you knew where to look. Holy. Ray whistled low. She really went all in on this, didn't she? 3 months of planning, minimum. Look at this. I scrolled to a text exchange between Jessica and someone named Keaton. She's been coordinating with this guy, setting up alibis, even practicing her victim routine. Keaton Marin? You know him? Ray's expression darkened. Corporate finance guy. Drives a silver BMW. Wears suits that cost more than most people's rent. He's been sniffing around Jessica for months, buying drinks, playing the successful businessman routine. And you didn't think to mention this? Wasn't my business. Besides, I figured you knew. Ray paused. You didn't know. I suspected. But suspecting and knowing are different things. I showed him more screenshots, dinner receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, hotel charges on credit cards I didn't have access to, even a car rental that coincided with a weekend Jessica claimed to be visiting her college roommate. She's been thorough, Ray admitted, but she made one mistake. What's that? She underestimated you. Look at this evidence. You've been documenting everything without letting on that you knew. That takes patience and planning. He was right. I'd spent weeks quietly gathering information, following digital trails, connecting dots. Jessica thought she was playing chess while I played checkers. She had no idea I'd been playing a completely different game. So what's your next move? Ray asked. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Ayla. Can we meet? There's something you need to know about Jessica's plans, something bad. I showed Ray the message. He read it twice, then looked up with concern. Ayla's not the type for drama, he said. If she says it's bad, I finished. We agreed to meet at the public library where Ayla worked. It seemed appropriately neutral, and Jessica would never think to look for me there. She considered libraries to be monuments to wasted time, full of people too poor or too stubborn to buy books like normal humans. The downtown library was a Carnegie building from 1902, all stone and stained glass and the kind of solid craftsmanship that didn't exist anymore. Ayla met me in the local history section, surrounded by dusty volumes about the town's founding and development. She looked nervous, which was unusual for her. Thank you for coming, she said, glancing around to make sure we were alone. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me after last night. Last night wasn't your fault. No, but what I'm about to tell you might make things worse. She pulled out her phone, her hands trembling slightly. Jessica asked me to help her with something last week. She said it was for a surprise party for your birthday. My birthday's not for 3 months. I know that now. Ayla's voice was barely above a whisper. She wanted me to call your old job, ask questions about why you left Henderson's previous company, said she wanted to make sure she got the timeline right for the party planning. My stomach dropped. I'd left my previous job under complicated circumstances. Not illegal, not unethical, but messy enough that I didn't like talking about it. A female coworker had developed an unhealthy fixation on me, making advances that became increasingly aggressive. When I reported it to HR, she claimed I'd been harassing her. The investigation cleared me completely, but the whole situation had been uncomfortable enough that I'd decided to move on. What did you find out? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. She wasn't planning a party, was she? Ayla's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She was looking for ammunition, something to use against you. What exactly did your contact tell you? That there had been some kind of harassment complaint, that it was investigated and dismissed, but that you'd left shortly afterward, and that... She paused, looking miserable. That there were rumors about inappropriate relationships with coworkers. Rumors started by the woman who filed the false complaint. I figured that out later, but Jessica didn't want the truth. She wanted the rumors. I felt that familiar shift inside me, tumblers falling into place. Jessica wasn't just planning to leave me, she was planning to destroy me. The financial accusations were just the opening move. She had a whole campaign mapped out, designed to turn me into the villain of our story. There's more, Ayla continued. She's been talking to Sierra and Melanie about organizing some kind of intervention, getting our parents involved, maybe even contacting your current boss. She wants to make sure everyone knows her version of events before you have a chance to defend yourself. When? This weekend, she's planning to call a family meeting, present her evidence, and ask everyone to support her decision to leave you. I leaned back against the history shelves, surrounded by the accumulated stories of people who'd faced their own crises and somehow survived them. Jessica's plan was elegant in its cruelty: isolate me from family and friends, damage my professional reputation, and leave me with nothing but the wreckage of my former life. But she'd made one crucial error. She'd underestimated Ayla's sense of fairness, and she'd definitely underestimated my capacity for strategic thinking. "Thank you for telling me this," I said. "I'm sorry I helped her, even unknowingly." "Don't be. You've actually helped me more than you realize." Ayla studied my face with those quiet, observant eyes. "You're not surprised by any of this, are you?" "Surprised by the extent, maybe, but not by the basic fact that she's been planning something. I've been watching her for weeks." "Watching her how?" I showed her some of the evidence I'd gathered. Not the most damaging stuff, but enough to demonstrate that I wasn't going into this fight unarmed. Ayla's eyes widened as she scrolled through screenshots and documents. "You've been investigating your own wife?" "I've been protecting myself from someone who stopped being my wife months ago." She handed back my phone, her expression thoughtful. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give her exactly what she wants," I said. "A public confrontation with all the evidence laid out for everyone to see. That sounds dangerous. For her, maybe, but I'm done being the victim in her story." As I left the library, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: anticipation. Jessica thought she was hunting a wounded animal. She had no idea she'd been stalking a predator. The thing about small towns is that everyone thinks they know everyone else's business, but they're usually working with about half the facts and twice the assumptions. By Thursday morning, Ray informed me that Jessica's version of events had made the full circuit from Murphy's bar to the coffee shop to the grocery store checkout lines. According to the gossip network, I was either a financial criminal, an emotional abuser, or both, depending on who was telling the story. "It's getting pretty ugly out there," Ray said when I stopped by the bar for lunch. "Melanie was holding court at the coffee shop this morning, talking about how Jessica's been hiding bruises for months." "Bruises I never gave her." "I know that. You know that. But people love a good victim story, especially when it involves someone they think they can look down on." I ordered a sandwich and considered my options. Jessica's smear campaign was working exactly as she'd planned. By the time she called her family meeting, public opinion would be so firmly on her side that any defense I offered would sound like desperate lies, unless I changed the narrative first. "Ray, how many people were in here when Melanie was spreading her stories?" "Maybe a dozen regulars." "Why?" "And they all heard about the bruises, the financial abuse, the whole sob story?" "Every word. Some of them were eating it up like candy." "Good. That means when the truth comes out, they'll remember being lied to." Ray's expression sharpened. "What truth?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken the previous weekend when Jessica thought I was working late. She'd been at the Riverside Hotel with Keaton Marin, and hotel security cameras had captured them in several compromising positions. Not explicit, but intimate enough to tell the real story. "She's been meeting him every Tuesday and Friday for 2 months, I explained. Always the same room, always paid for with a credit card she thinks I don't know about." "How did you get these?" Hotel security footage is surprisingly easy to access when you're doing renovation work on their conference center. Professional courtesy. Ray whistled low. "You've been planning this for a while." "Since I found the first hotel receipt in her gym bag 6 weeks ago." "And you didn't confront her?" "Why interrupt your enemy when she's making mistakes?" My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Family meeting Sunday at 2, my parents' house. Don't be late." I showed Ray the message. He read it and shook his head. "She's really going through with it." "Of course she is. She thinks she holds all the cards." "Don't you want to stop her before she humiliates herself in front of her family?" I considered that question while I finished my sandwich. 6 months ago, I would have tried to protect Jessica from her own poor choices. I would have confronted her privately, given her a chance to come clean, maybe even tried to work things out. But that was before I understood the depth of her contempt for me, before I realized she saw our marriage as nothing more than a convenient arrangement she could discard whenever something better came along. "No," I said finally. "I want her to go through with it exactly as planned." "That's cold, brother." She made it cold when she decided to destroy my reputation instead of just asking for a divorce. Ray nodded slowly. "So, what's your play?" "I'm going to let her present her case to the family, all of it. The financial accusations, the emotional abuse claims, maybe even the harassment rumors if she's feeling particularly vindictive. And then I'm going to present the evidence. All of it. In front of her parents, her sister, and anyone else she invites to witness my humiliation. Including the hotel photos? Especially the hotel photos. Ray was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. You know there's no coming back from something like that. Once you drop that bomb, your marriage is over. My marriage has been over for months. Jessica just forgot to mention it. That afternoon, I made a few strategic phone calls. First to Marcus Webb, Ayla's lawyer boyfriend who'd missed the dinner earlier in the week. Turned out he hadn't missed anything. Ayla had broken up with him 2 days before the dinner, citing irreconcilable differences. Interesting that Jessica hadn't updated her intelligence. Then I called my boss at Henderson Construction, gave him a heads up that there might be some personal drama spilling over into professional spaces, and assured him that none of it would affect my work performance. He appreciated the warning and offered to provide character references if needed. Finally, I called a few mutual friends Jessica and I had maintained over the years, people who would likely be contacted for their opinions once the story went fully public. I didn't tell them anything specific, just mentioned that there might be some false stories circulating and asked them to reserve judgment until they heard both sides. By Friday evening, I was as prepared as I could be. All my evidence was organized, backed up, and ready for presentation. I'd even prepared a timeline showing exactly when Jessica's behavior had changed, when the hotel meetings had started, and when she'd begun building her case against me. Saturday passed quietly. Jessica spent most of the day out, probably doing final preparations with Sierra and Melanie. I used the time to clean the house, do laundry, and take care of all the domestic tasks she'd been neglecting lately. If I was about to become a single man again, I wanted to make sure I remembered how to take care of myself. That evening, Ayla called. I just wanted to check on you, she said. Make sure you're okay with what's happening tomorrow. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. You sound different, calmer. I feel calmer. There's something liberating about finally knowing where you stand. Jessica's been calling me all week, trying to get me to support her story. She wants me to back up her claims about your behavior. And I told her I could only speak to what I'd personally witnessed, which is nothing that supports her version of events. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She's planning something big for tomorrow, something she thinks will end the discussion permanently. The harassment rumors? Probably, and maybe something else? She's been very secretive, even with Sierra and Melanie. After we hung up, I spent the evening reviewing my evidence one more time. Photos, bank records, text messages, hotel receipts, even GPS data from Jessica's phone showing her location during times she'd claimed to be elsewhere. It was comprehensive, damning, and completely factual. Jessica came home around 10, looking pleased with herself. She barely acknowledged my presence, just headed straight upstairs to pack an overnight bag. Going somewhere? I asked. Staying at Sierra's tonight. I want to be well rested for tomorrow. Good idea. You'll want to be sharp. She paused at the top of the stairs, looking down at me with something that might have been pity. You know, Kai, this doesn't have to be ugly. If you just admit what you've done, take responsibility for your behavior, we might be able to work out an amicable separation. What exactly do you think I've done? We both know. The financial manipulation, the emotional control, the way you've isolated me from my friends and family. Have I isolated you? Because it seems like you've been spending plenty of time with friends lately. Her expression flickered, just for a moment. I'm not going to argue with you tonight. Tomorrow everything will be out in the open. Yes, I agreed. Everything will be. After she left, I poured myself a glass of the bourbon I'd brought to her parents' house. I'd bought 2 bottles, keeping one for myself. Then I sat in my living room, surrounded by the accumulated artifacts of 12 years of marriage, and waited for morning. Tomorrow, Jessica would get exactly what she wanted. A public forum where all the secrets would be revealed and everyone would know the truth about our marriage. She just had no idea whose secrets would be more interesting. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything look like a postcard. I dressed carefully, the same navy suit I'd worn to the disastrous dinner, but this time I felt like I was putting on armor instead of a costume. Jessica's car wasn't in the driveway when I left, which meant she was probably already at her parents' house, setting the stage for my public execution. I stopped at Murphy's for coffee and found Ray wiping down tables with unusual intensity. Big day, he said without looking up. The biggest. You sure about this? Once you drop those photos, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. Ray straightened up, studying my face with bartender's intuition. You look like a man who's made peace with his choices. I have. Good. Because Jessica's been making the rounds this morning. Stopped by here around 9, told me I should probably distance myself from you for my own reputation's sake. Thoughtful of her. She also mentioned that some disturbing information about your past was going to come out today. Said she hoped people would understand why she'd stayed quiet for so long. I nodded. Jessica was sticking to her script, building sympathy before the main event. It was actually perfect. The more dramatically she presented her case, the more devastating my response would be. The Hartwell house looked the same as always, but there were more cars in the driveway than I'd expected. Jessica had invited an audience for my humiliation. I recognized Sierra's red Toyota and Melanie's SUV, but there were 3 other vehicles I didn't know. Margaret answered the door with a strained smile. "Kai, come in. Everyone's in the living room." The scene was set like a tribunal. Jessica sat in the center of the couch, flanked by Sierra and Melanie, looking appropriately fragile in a pale blue dress that emphasized her delicate features. Robert occupied his usual chair, stern and judgmental. Margaret hovered near the kitchen, wringing her hands. Ayla sat slightly apart from the group, watching everything with those observant eyes. The strangers turned out to be Dr. Patricia Vance, a therapist Jessica had apparently been seeing, Tom Bradley, a lawyer who specialized in family law, and Detective Mike Morrison, who'd gone to high school with Jessica and now worked domestic violence cases for the county sheriff's department. "Quite a crowd," I said, taking the only remaining seat, a straight-back chair that had been positioned to face the couch like a defendant's dock. "I wanted people here who could provide professional perspective," Jessica said, her voice already carrying that tremulous quality she'd perfected. "This is too important for just family." Dr. Vance leaned forward with practiced concern. "Mr. Dornell, I want you to know this is a safe space. Whatever's happened between you and Jessica, we're here to help both of you move forward in a healthy way." "I appreciate that." Tom Bradley consulted a legal pad covered with notes. "Before we begin, I should mention that anything discussed here today could potentially be relevant in future legal proceedings. You might want to consider having your own representation present." "I think I can handle it." Detective Morrison hadn't said anything yet, but his presence sent a clear message. Jessica wasn't just planning to embarrass me. She was building a case for potential criminal charges. "All right then," Robert said, his banker's voice cutting through the tension. "Jessica, you called this meeting. The floor is yours." Jessica took a shaky breath, composing herself like an actress preparing for her big scene. "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I can't live with the lies anymore." She started with the financial accusations, presenting bank statements that showed large withdrawals and transfers. Tom Bradley helped her walk through each transaction, building a narrative of financial abuse and manipulation. It was a compelling performance, made more effective by her obvious distress. "He's been controlling every aspect of our finances," she continued. "I haven't had access to our accounts in months. When I try to question him about money, he becomes angry, sometimes violent." Detective Morrison's pen moved across his notepad. "Has he ever struck you?" Not directly, but he's grabbed my arms, pushed me against walls. And the psychological abuse has been constant." Dr. Vance nodded sympathetically. "Emotional abuse can be just as damaging as physical violence. Can you give us some examples?" Jessica launched into a catalog of alleged psychological torture, isolation from friends, constant criticism, threats of financial ruin if she tried to leave. It was a masterful performance, hitting every note of classic abuse patterns with enough specific details to sound authentic. Sierra and Melanie provided supporting testimony, describing how they'd watched Jessica become withdrawn and fearful over the past year. They'd noticed bruises, they said, and changes in her personality that suggested ongoing trauma. "I finally realized I had to document everything," Jessica said, pulling out her phone. "I started recording our conversations, taking photos of the bruises, keeping track of his threats." She played several audio clips, conversations between us that had been edited to remove context and make me sound controlling and aggressive. The bruises in the photos looked real enough, though I knew I'd never caused them. "The final straw," Jessica continued, "was when I discovered he'd been researching ways to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. He wanted to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could take complete control of our assets." That was a nice touch, specific enough to sound credible, serious enough to justify her extreme response. Tom Bradley made notes while Detective Morrison asked follow-up questions about dates and details. Through it all, I sat quietly, letting Jessica build her case. The assembled audience was clearly convinced. Margaret dabbed at her eyes. Robert's face had gone granite hard with disapproval. Even Ayla looked shaken by her sister's testimony. "I know this is difficult to hear," Dr. Vance said, turning toward me, "but these are very serious allegations. How do you respond to what Jessica has shared?" I pulled out my phone and set it on the coffee table. I'd like to present some evidence of my own. Tom Bradley straightened in his chair. What kind of evidence? The kind that tells the real story. I started with the bank records, the complete unedited versions that showed exactly where every penny had gone. Jessica's face went pale as I walked through her spending patterns, the cash withdrawals that coincided with her hotel meetings, the credit cards she'd opened without my knowledge. This is interesting, I said, showing a series of transactions. These hotel charges, the Riverside every Tuesday and Friday for 2 months, always the same room number, always paid for with this card that Jessica thought I didn't know about. Detective Morrison looked up from his notes. What's the significance of those charges? Instead of answering directly, I opened the photo gallery on my phone. The first image showed Jessica and Keaton Marin in the hotel lobby, her hand on his arm, both of them laughing. The timestamp showed last Tuesday at 2:17 p.m. The room went quiet. This is from the hotel's security system, I explained calmly. I've been doing renovation work there, so I had access to the footage. Would you like to see more? I scrolled through the images, Jessica and Keaton entering the elevator together, leaving the hotel 3 hours later, kissing in the parking garage. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. You were spying on me, Jessica whispered, but her voice had lost its tremulous quality. I was documenting the truth, just like you were, apparently. I played one of my own audio recordings, a conversation between Jessica and Sierra where they discussed the best way to present false abuse allegations. Jessica's voice was clear and calculating as she described which bruises would photograph best and how to edit our conversations to maximum effect. The bruises in your photos, I continued, came from your kickboxing classes at the gym. I have the membership records and photos from your instructor's social media showing the same marks after particularly intense sessions. Dr. Vance looked stunned. Tom Bradley was frantically taking notes. Detective Morrison had stopped writing entirely and was staring at Jessica with professional skepticism, but I wasn't finished. The harassment allegations from my previous job, I said, looking directly at Jessica. You had Ayla call them, didn't you, looking for ammunition to use against me? Ayla's face flushed red. I didn't know what she was really doing. Of course you didn't, because you're not the kind of person who would participate in character assassination. I turned back to Jessica. But you are. You were so focused on building your case that you never bothered to verify the facts. The harassment complaint against me was filed by a woman who was later terminated for stalking behavior. The investigation cleared me completely, and my former employer has already provided written statements confirming my version of events. I handed Tom Bradley a folder containing letters from my previous boss, HR records, and even testimony from coworkers who'd witnessed the actual harassment I'd endured. The room had transformed from a supportive tribunal into something resembling a cross-examination. Jessica sat rigid on the couch, her carefully constructed victim narrative crumbling in real time. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out the final piece of evidence. Jessica's been planning this for months, coordinating with Keaton Marin to destroy my reputation before filing for divorce. The goal wasn't just to leave me, it was to ensure I lost everything in the process. I showed them text messages between Jessica and Keaton discussing strategy, emails about asset protection, even a draft of the false police report Jessica had been planning to file. The conspiracy was laid out in their own words, complete with timelines and tactical discussions. Detective Morrison closed his notepad and looked at Jessica with undisguised disgust. Ma'am, filing false reports is a felony. Conspiracy to commit fraud is also a serious crime. Tom Bradley was already packing up his papers. I can't represent someone who's lied to me about the basic facts of their case. Dr. Vance sat back in her chair, professional composure shattered. I've been completely misled about the nature of this situation. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stared at me with something approaching hatred, all pretense of victimhood abandoned. Sierra and Melanie looked like they wanted to disappear. Margaret was crying openly. Robert's face had gone through several color changes. Only Ayla seemed unsurprised by the revelations. She watched her sister with sad resignation, like she'd been expecting something like this for years. You orchestrated this entire meeting, Jessica said finally. You knew exactly what I was planning. I knew you were planning something destructive. I just gave you enough rope to hang yourself with. You manipulative piece of... Careful, Detective Morrison interrupted. You're already in enough trouble without making threats in front of witnesses. Jessica looked around the room, seeing her support network evaporating in real time. Her parents wouldn't meet her eyes. Her friends were edging toward the door. The professionals she'd brought to legitimize her claims were treating her like a criminal. This isn't over, she said, standing up with whatever dignity she had left. Yes, it is, I replied. Your lawyer's gone, your therapist knows you're a liar, and the detective has enough evidence to charge you with filing false reports. It's over. As Jessica stormed out, followed by Sierra and Melanie, the remaining people in the room sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Robert spoke. I owe you an apology, Kai. This is not what I expected. None of us expected it, Margaret added tearfully. How could she do something like this? I stood up, straightening my suit jacket. People do terrible things when they think they can get away with them. Jessica just miscalculated. Detective Morrison handed me his card. You'll need to file a formal complaint if you want to pursue charges for the false allegations. I'll think about it. As the crowd dispersed, Ayla approached me hesitantly. I'm sorry about my sister, about all of this. It's not your fault. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there. Maybe, but she's responsible for her own choices. Ayla nodded, then surprised me by reaching out to touch my arm. What will you do now? I looked around the Hartwell living room one last time, taking in the wreckage of what had been my extended family for 12 years. Start over, I suppose. Figure out what comes next. That sounds lonely. Maybe, but it's honest. As I drove home through the crisp autumn afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. The marriage was over, the lies were exposed, and Jessica's attempt to destroy me had backfired completely. Tomorrow I'd start the process of rebuilding my life. Tonight, I was just going to sit in my living room, drink some good bourbon, and enjoy the silence of a house where nobody was plotting against me. It wasn't the ending I'd planned when I got married 12 years ago, but it was honest, and after months of living with lies, honesty felt like a luxury I could finally afford. The sun was setting as I pulled into my driveway, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Jessica's car was gone, along with most of her belongings. She'd apparently decided not to stick around for the aftermath of her failed ambush. I unlocked my front door and stepped into the quiet house that was finally completely mine.